what leadership behavior helps AI initiatives gain long-term credibility inside an enterprise?
So I think that, a lot of it is the sincerity of their belief. Actions speak louder than words. If you're looking to determine if your organization is really going to invest in AI, if you knew that CEO never had sent an email and was still sending faxes around, I think that would be a strong indicator that the sincerity of that belief really isn't quite there. The leaders who themselves are, building their own custom gyms or GPTs or Claude projects, I think that experience is very informative.
Welcome to Discover Dialogues podcast, powered by TechDogs. The world of business and technology is evolving at breakneck speed. AI breakthroughs, digital transformation, and game-changing innovations are reshaping industries every day. On this show, we dive into the trends, ideas, and strategies driving the future. We're sitting down with industry leaders, innovators, and disruptors to bring you fresh insights, bold perspectives, and real conversations that matter. So plug in, tune in, and let's discover what's next.
Today on the show, we're joined by Kurt Muehmel, Head of AI Strategy at Dataiku. With more than 11 years at Dataiku, Kurt has lived the journey from early-stage startup to global enterprise leader. From driving US expansion to advising the C-suite on AI strategy, he brings a deeply practical perspective on how technology transformations unfold inside large organizations. In this episode, Kurt breaks down the operational realities behind scaling AI, the governance mindset required to build trust, and the architectural mistakes enterprises must avoid early on. Let's dive in.
Welcome to another episode of TechDogs Discover Dialogues. Kurt, it's a pleasure to have you on the show today.
Well, it's great to be here, Nikhil. Thanks.
Before we dive into today's discussion about enterprise AI, scaling data science, and the realities behind democratizing AI, I would like to rewind the clock a little bit, Kurt. I believe that you joined Dataiku as the employee number 20, right? Quite in their initial stages. And since then, you have helped the organization grow across multiple functions, right? From sales, engineering, and customer success, right? And even the US expansion project you were part of. And now you are, helping AI strategy at an executive level, right? And that journey gives you a perspective on how AI evolves, not just technically, but organizationally, right? And Kurt, I believe that you have also worked across consulting, public sector, and scaled Dataiku globally across EMEA, US, and beyond, right? Can you walk us through your professional journey and a few key moments that has shaped it?
Yeah. Well, thanks already for the opportunity to be here on the podcast, and also just to be able to share this story because I feel so lucky having been able to do all the things that I've done through my career. I think in many ways, my career is one of a lot of diversity and different directions. And if I have to look back on it and define or identify a common theme, it's always been looking to find myself into more and more complex and interesting environments where I get to identify the connections between things and hopefully deliver some value for whoever I was working for at that time. But yeah, exactly like you said, prior to Dataiku, I was doing a number of different things. An important part of my biography is that I was born in the United States but moved to France after university, and so I've been working mostly in France for that period. But like you said, working in consulting, working in the public sector, and then finding my way ultimately to Dataiku, as you said, as employee number 20. And at Dataiku, it's just been this incredible journey of always doing what was new and what needed to be defined and discovered, really. And so at the very beginning, indeed, that was selling into the US market. So Dataiku was founded in France originally. And when I joined, there was a product, there were a number of great customers, but we hadn't yet sold outside of France. At the same time, there was interest coming in from other countries, notably the United States. And I think the team at the time was looking for somebody who could dive into that situation and try to figure out what were these customers or potential customers in the United States, what were they looking for? Could we meet their needs? And could the product be positioned in the right way for them? long story short, the answer was yes. We could figure that out. We signed a number of large customers relatively early on, and that's really when my really learning journey began at Dataiku. I'm not coming from an engineering background or a data science background, and so everything I've learned has been from my colleagues, and mostly, I would say, or even more importantly, from the customers themselves about what their needs are in terms of bringing AI into the enterprise. And so over the years, it's been a number of different roles, like you said, leading a sales team, running our sales engineering function, managing our customer success and data science functions, and now working in this strategy role. But I think one of the very fascinating aspects, in addition to the personal aspects for me, has just been observing how organizations have been required to evolve with all these different waves of technologies that have come out over that now 11-year period that I've been working at Dataiku. Everything from what was at the time cutting edge distributed computing systems like Hadoop back in 2015, all the way out to where we are now today. And there's just been so many different generations of technology, and so many new challenges that get presented for bringing this technology into the enterprise and making it valuable, or using it for the most valuable applications.
Definitely, you have a very wide array of experience, right? You've explored various sectors, various roles, various functions. One question I wanted to ask as a follow-up, because you have helped the whole US expansion as well. What surprised you most about scaling into the US market compared to Europe?
So I think, very early on, what was the most important learning for myself and for Dataiku, was that, especially at this period, I think that there was a real willingness for risk, that is higher in the United States. I think there's it's well studied, the tolerance for risk between different cultures, and I think that finds its expression in the way that organizations deal with risk. In the United States, it's not really shocking to put down $50,000, $60,000, $80,000 on what is essentially a pilot, right? There's no guarantee of success, and the value for the companies is to test something to see if it works, to identify if it works, and if not, fine, move on. And for a young company that at that time didn't have the depth of references, didn't have the name recognition that we do now, that's incredibly important. In Europe, the contrast is more of a proof of concept approach, where we're not going to sign up for a software license until we've seen that this actually works, where we've actually built out a use case, where we've proven value, where we've documented everything. And I think ultimately, right, this is just a reflection of these different cultures. And well, culture is a pretty powerful force, and it's understandable that it would find its way into the behaviors of these organizations. So yeah, from a pure technology perspective, it means that large organizations, enterprises in the US, generally speaking, they're a little bit more tolerant of trying out something new, taking that risk, and seeing if it's going to be beneficial for their organization or not.
And that brings us to the heart of today's discussion, right? Because scaling a company and scaling AI inside enterprises have surprisingly similar challenges, right? Both require structure, both require clarity, and both require the right foundations, right? Because technology, and especially AI, is evolving at a very rapid scale, right? And there's a lot of conversation happening across the globe about how do we use AI in enterprises, right? And the discussion is more about democratization, architecture, scaling models. But beneath all the hype about AI, there are very concrete operational realities that determine whether AI succeeds or it fails, right? So let's start with something we hear constantly about: democratizing AI, right? Many organizations talk about how do they democratize AI, right? According to you, what concrete capabilities must be in place before that becomes realistic?
Yeah, it's an excellent question, and I think that we need to think about the concept of democratizing AI as as requiring some nuance, right? Because I think an easy version of this answer is that if an organization were to some way deploy its own version of ChatGPT internally, well, in that case, everybody now has access to AI, so they've fully democratized AI, and we know a lot of organizations have done this, either building their own wrappers on top of some of these large language models, or going through any number of the commercial offerings out there, and this can be very useful. I think we all use ChatGPT in our daily lives, ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini or whatever your preference might be. We all, I know that I have my several tabs open all day long, working across several of these different assistants. But when we're talking about democratizing AI in the enterprise, I think that we should consider that sort of democratization really as like the level one or like level 0.1 of democratizing AI, because it's valuable, right? These chatbots are valuable, and if you've succeeded in bringing it into an enterprise and you've taken it through the security process and the procurement process, that's great as well. That's a success. However, AI's potential within the enterprise is so much greater, right? There's so much more that can be done in terms of re-engineering processes, in terms of really rethinking the way that the business runs. And the people who know that are not necessarily just the AI engineers. They're the domain experts. They're the operations engineers. They are the financial experts. They know how the business runs. And real democratization of AI would be giving them the ability to build AI systems themselves that can augment, that can automate, that can really transform the processes that they know best. If you've worked in a large organization like this, you know that these processes they're sometimes extremely complex, right? With a lot of different inputs, a lot of different people involved in it. And for AI to have its full potential, or for it to realize its full potential within the enterprise, you need to be able to really transform those most complex processes. So that's what I'm looking forward to in terms of democratizing AI, is the moment when organizations will be able to equip these people, right? The really smart people who really know the business with the ability to themselves build AI capabilities that transform those processes.
Definitely. But when an organization is looking at democratizing AI, right, there's a very important factor that comes into picture, that's governance, right? Because uh, it can be at risk, right? And no organization would like to put their data at stake, right? So, according to you, how should enterprises think about governance when democratizing AI across organization?
Yeah, so I think that it's really important to think about governance, not just as risk mitigation, which it is also that, right? It's very important to have in place processes by which you can have visibility, control over which use cases are getting green lighted in the first place, how they're being built, which data is being used in them. Perhaps there's a consideration of which AI model you're going to use with which data. Maybe you're going to use one of the big public models for less sensitive data, but for very sensitive data, perhaps you're using an open source model that you're running on infrastructure that you fully control, right? There are considerations like that. But I think that it's important really to think of governance more broadly. I think that in addition to those risk mitigation, we need to also think about governance from a perspective of business alignment. Are we sure that the AI systems that we're building are really aligned to the business objectives that we have as well? It's not just a matter of making sure that it's safe and reliable. That's of course important. It's a prerequisite, really. But you need to go beyond that to really think: is this the best use of AI in our organization? Are these the processes which are going to most benefit from the augmentation, automation that AI can provide? And if so, how can we ensure that we're focusing on those initiatives, that we're really investing there? So I think that governance for AI, it's essential because one, it's important for that risk mitigation that we discussed. Two, it's important for business alignment, and those two things taken together, that's really what leads to trust, right? And I think in order for AI to be fully adopted, you need to have that underlying trust that it's working well, that it's secure, that it's not going to be leaking data somewhere that it's not supposed to be, but also trust that it's doing a good job, that it's aligned with the business, that it's actually performing its job well. Which takes us to questions of, if we had an AI agent, well, what is its job? How does that job get specified? And then how do we measure the quality of its response? So I think taking a very holistic view of governance for AI is really essential, not just for the basic security questions, but really for the overall value and success of AI more broadly within an enterprise.
But when we also speak about risk, right, and not trusting AI, right, not only it is at the senior most level wherein that's about the risk and governance and all, but even at the junior most level, right, people start thinking that if the organization integrates AI, they might lose their job, and that creates hindrance in the whole adoption of the technology. How do you think enterprises can balance this out?
Yeah, it's a real and important question. AI is going to be a transformative technology. It's going to increase productivity, and if we take just a very purely economics 101 definition of productivity, that means greater outputs for the same or fewer inputs. Which means that one of those inputs is human labor, and so that does mean that less human labor will be required to get the same amount of outputs. Again, if AI is going to be this beneficial or economically beneficial technology that we all believe it's going to be. But does that necessarily translate to greater unemployment? Does that necessarily translate to net job losses? There, I'm skeptical. I think that us as human beings, we always adopt technology, sometimes in you know uneven ways and in messy ways, and often periods of rapid technological change do see a lot of let's say challenging environments for workers as they're adapting to this. So I think that it's very normal and it's right. We should anticipate that there's going to be impacts to jobs. Jobs are necessarily going to change. Some jobs are going to go away, or at least or are going to be much less prevalent in the economy. But I think that the greater risk, though, is to look at that and say that we're just not going to use this technology at all. Because I think there, maybe you'll have a couple of years where, things aren't changing, where you're feeling protected, but the world is changing around you. And I think you're really putting the ongoing viability of the business at risk if you're not leading into that in a hard and focused way. Now, I think this puts a lot of responsibility on leaders, both leaders within the organization to bring their people along on that journey, but also leaders in our societies, which can be, of course, our political leaders, but also other social leaders as well, to help humanity, all of us, manage this transition, because we really are at a pivotal transition moment in the history of human work, in the history of humans' relationship with technology, and it's necessarily going to be bumpy. So the best thing that we can do is lean into those bumps, but also help one another out to try to navigate it.
That's a very valid point that you put across. That we are in one of the most pivotal transformations of human technology collaboration, and probably one of the most pivotal transformations in humankind in its entirety altogether, right? And there will be bumps, but we need to be there for one another, and also to that matter of fact that if you're not in the race already, you already left behind. So it's now or never, right? But so that brings me down to the agenda of this podcast that we've been discussing. And when we speak about when enterprises want to integrate AI, and when they're experimenting with tools, right, things can get complicated very quickly, right? Enterprises rarely operate with one model or one workflow. There might be multiple workflows, multiple tools that have been integrated. So usually enterprises are usually juggling with tools, vendors, and internal platforms and governance layers, right? So according to you, what architectural mistakes creates the most frictions later? Because like, we don't have to think about technology right now. Technology is evolving fast, so we have to also think about future. So how can we avoid mistakes initially to avoid friction later?
Yeah, so I think that really the biggest error that I see today in AI adoption in the enterprise is thinking about problems locally rather than globally or systematically within the organization. AI is a general purpose technology. It's like electricity, or it's like computing in that respect. It's not something that is that's confined to any one domain, to any one business unit, or to really any type of problem. And so, if we are looking at AI as a local solution to some limited problem within one business unit, within one task, within one process, and we're only focusing on applying AI in that way, so a little bit here and a little bit there, looking at it just from the lens of a single problem needing a single solution, I think that organizations really miss the opportunity to use this moment in this technology transformation to adopt an architecture which is going to be more robust, which is going to be more standardized for the application of AI across the business. Because once again, it applies to essentially every part of the
Mhm.
business. And so, one of the things that we're thinking about a lot these days is the way in which organizations need to start thinking about abstracting away from individual problems, individual AI systems, and up into thinking about how the business itself is supposed to solve problems, right? So
Mhm.
let me develop that just a little bit. Within any business, right, there's many different processes which are broadly designed to solve complex problems of when should we, perform these, significant maintenance routines within our factory. It needs to take into account the status of the machines, on the availability of resources, human, financial, mechanical. It needs to take into account the opportunity cost of taking those machines offline to perform that maintenance, which means that we need to take into account forecasts for sales in the future. It needs to take into account the risk that we're running by not doing that maintenance. What if something breaks down? What's the cost of that? It needs to integrate all these different types of information and intelligence, from financial to the mechanical, the engineering, and all of this to lead to one very critical decision. And in order to operate that or to transform that into an AI driven process, rather than looking at this as isolated systems of sources of data and data transformations and predictive models and so on. We need to think about the way in which the organization is really working through that problem, the way in which the organization is reasoning itself. The term reasoning is, of course, used a lot to talk about the way that AI models work. But I think we can think about the term even more broadly as the way that an enterprise works through the different steps of a problem to come to an intelligent solution. And that's where I think organizations need to start thinking about abstracting away up into some sort of reasoning layer. So you would have a data layer, a compute layer, maybe some kind of intelligence layer, but then a layer in which you're actually defining where and why these problems are being solved in the way that they are. Who is accountable for them? What are the trade-offs? Which trade-offs are we accepting? How much risk are we accepting to run? All this needs to be defined somewhere as part of this AI system, and we're thinking a lot about this as an architectural question, and creating that layer where you can essentially decouple those decisions and that definition from the underlying data systems, intelligence systems, AI systems, so that you can start applying that across the business.
Definitely. And Kurt, like, because when we think about, democratizing AI and, giving architecture, so, getting this architecture somewhat right? Sometimes the proof of concepts of AI can look fabulous on paper, but when it comes to really executing it or operationalizing it, the pilot AIs, right? It can be a challenge for
Mhm.
multiple organizations, and I believe that's where various organizations are also struggling currently, because they think that AI is going to solve this problem, this problem of mine, but when it comes to launching the pilots, that's where many of the projects stall, right? So what operational gaps shows up most often at the transition point when we are moving AI from a proof of concept to ex- daily use?
Yeah, so I think it's really most often a problem of business alignment, where what was originally built in the proof of concept was not closely enough aligned to the business needs and wasn't taking into account, for example, some of those trade-offs, where maybe there's some business processes which are more or less error tolerant, where you can accept that there's going to be a 1 or 2% error rate. Then, of course, there's other business processes where that would be totally unacceptable, and you need, several nines, 0.001%, 0.0001% error rate in order for that to be acceptable. So I think defining and accurately capturing the those business requirements, rather than focusing just on the shininess of an AI proof of concept, is often being skipped in this early rush that we've seen over the past, I would say, 18 months to really push through this pilot phase. At the same time, I don't want to denigrate them too much. There's a lot of useful learning in it. We're coming to the conclusion that we need to spend more time on business alignment, on process reengineering, in order to design AI systems that don't just function in that pilot stage, but really do deliver not only the results, but that deliver the results in the way with the reliability which is required by the business itself. And all this, it's important to note, is going to be very specific to any one business and any part of that business. This is because, of course, every business is different, and it's also the opportunity for differentiation between these businesses. If we were to apply some of these same models, AI models, naively to every single business, the results would be very similar, which means that there wouldn't be any competitive differentiation between any two competitors in any given industry, right? If everyone's using the same model in the same way, they're going to get the same results. They've spent a lot of money. They've enriched a couple of AI companies. However, they're still neck and neck in that competitive race. But once we start really defining the specificity and customizing the way in which this AI is applied, combining it with business rules, with other sources of intelligence, with that proprietary data, with these custom trained machine learning models, which inject a new source of intelligence into it, with the right human in the loop oversight and control, that's where you start ending up with high impact, highly differentiated AI systems within the enterprise, and that's ultimately where we get out of this pilot trap, and into a future where we are scaling high impact, high value AI across the enterprise.
Definitely, I agree to you, Kurt, because like when AI moves from experimentation to enterprise initiative, it stops purely becoming technical. It becomes more about cultural, it becomes more about behavioral, and ultimately it becomes a question of credibility, right? And in your journey, definitely you have advised C-suites, right? And work closely with customers at different maturity levels, right? And seen what happens when AI initiatives either gain momentum or quietly stall behind, right? And often the differentiator isn't the technology itself, right? In your experience, what leadership behavior helps AI initiatives gain long-term credibility inside an enterprise?
So I think that a lot of it is the sincerity of their belief, and what I mean by that is that actions speak louder than words. I think
Mhm.
it's very clear that large organizations had to go out and say, yes, we're going all in on AI. This is a huge opportunity. They made a point to say that in the earnings calls. That everybody got a little boost when they said that in their earnings calls, and so on. But I think if you're looking to determine if your organization is really going to invest in AI, and what I see, of course, with the organizations that I work with, is that leadership is actively engaged, that they're users themselves of AI. I think if we roll this back 30 years and we're thinking about prior technology transitions, and in this case the advent of the internet, if you were hearing your CEO say that they're going to go all in on the internet, that this is going to be transformative for the business, but that CEO, and imagine this is 1998 or something. If you knew that CEO never had sent an email and was still sending faxes around, or having people type, having a secretary type up their messages to mail a letter, I think that would be a strong indicator that the sincerity of that belief really isn't quite there. And so what I would be looking for today, and what I do notice today, is that the leaders who themselves are, building their own custom gyms or GPTs or Claude projects, those who are really hands-on, who are looking for ways who can to apply it to their own business, or even just, of course, to their personal life. I would want to know if a leader who is all in supposedly on AI have they installed Claude Code on their personal computer and have they tested it out? Like, if not, I would have some real doubts about it, about that sincerity, if they're not actually practicing that belief in their daily life. Because I think those who are real enthusiasts, right? We're finding a lot of ways that these technologies can be transformative at that very local level. And I think that experience is very informative for thinking about how they can be applied at a more global, enterprise-wide level.
That analogy really makes the point clear, Kurt. Leadership credibility grows when actions match ambition, right? Actions are more louder than words. Thank you so much, for giving such insightful, uh, details for us, about democratizing AI, architecture, and operational reality and leadership credibility, right? Now, we are towards the end of this episode, and I would like to shift the gears a bit. And I would ask you a few rapid fire questions, which will help our audience to understand Kurt behind the designations and the one who joined Dataiku with an employee code 20, right? So these are, rapid fire questions. It can be quick, without thinking, whatever comes first to your mind, you can, give it a shot. Let me know whenever you're ready.
Okay, let's do it.
Perfect. Your favorite way to spend a quiet evening?
Oh, reading a novel. I love literature.
Any favorite author you might want to recommend us?
Kazuo Ishiguro, a British writer, wrote an incredible novel actually related to AI, Clara and the Sun, which I highly recommend. It's very human. It's a human novel about technology, which I love.
Something people would be surprised to learn about you.
So I am a bit of a, I guess in the UK we would say a petrol head. I like motorsports, cars, fast cars, motorcycles, all of that. And this is perhaps at odds with, at least this sort of philosophical air that I like to take with my colorful glasses and so on. So yeah, that's often one of the secrets that people discover once they get to know me a little bit more.
Definitely. A travel experience, probably, and, a motorhead experience that stayed with you for a longer time.
So we took an incredible family road trip when we were living in the States for a couple of years, and just driving through the deserts of the American West. The four of us in the car, and it was just a really powerful experience for the family, and a very specific, locally specific experience as well. So it was really delightful.
So you could experience the wild, wild west, I guess.
Very much, it was very much that.
One thing you like to do just for yourself?
So running. I love to take time to run, and it's a way for me to really get away from everything. Typically, I don't listen to anything when I run. I don't take my phone with me. It's just my breath and my footsteps, and I can just disconnect from everything.
And one last, rapid fire question: if you could instantly learn one fun skill, what would it be?
I wish I could read faster. I think I read pretty quickly as it is, but then I hear about these other people who read 300, 400, 500 page books in 2 days, and they'll acknowledge that that they're skimming a little bit, but you get the sense that they really retain the important parts, and I wish I had that ability. There's just so much to learn. It feels like the only constraint is time.
Definitely, AI can give you that ability. You can just put the PDFs up and be like, give me in summary. But I know that for a avid reader like you, it would not make sense.
No,
But
it's the process which is valuable, right? It's the process,
exactly,
the page.
but considering how we are moving towards, and where we are moving towards, everybody has lost the whole patience. And I appreciate that you have that patience to go through the entire novel and read it by yourself. Kurt, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure having you with us today. And thank you so much for joining with us and sharing your valuable insights on AI, democratization, governance, and how leaders can grow with the technology that we have currently. Any parting words would you like to share with our audience?
So the first, thank you very much for the opportunity. It's been a great conversation, and really the parting words for the audience are, lean into this bumpy ride that we're all going to be going on. This is it's going to be disruptive, it's going to be transformative, but I think that it's going to be extremely valuable for humanity at large. But we do need to get through it together.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your time, Kurt.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe on YouTube, Instagram, or your favorite podcast app. Catch past episodes and more at techdogs.com. See you next time.